Hi, my name is Rhea Werner, and I am hosting this conversation on behalf of Strengthening the Heartland. So, if you haven't heard a lot about them, please do check them out. They're sponsoring today's event, and they are a wonderful organization dedicated to helping people. So, on behalf of Strengthening the Heartland, I'd like to welcome David Sheff today. And, David, may I read a little bio about you?
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's
And
see.
by the way,
Yeah,
just before you do, I
yeah.
want to say, first of all, Sarah, thank you so much for doing this, and
Thank you.
everyone who's here, thank you, and thank you to the university. I mean, I obviously am. This is what I care about more than anything, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk.
I love that you're here. I recently read Beautiful Boy, and your passion showed through. I have the new edition that has the acknowledgments at the end and the sort of addendum. And I'm excited to talk with you about that today. Before we jump in real quick, well, I guess not real quick because it's very important, but David is the author of Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction, which was a #1 New York Times bestseller. This book was based on the article called My Addicted Son, which appeared in the New York Times Magazine and won a special award from the American Psychological Association for outstanding contribution to the understanding of addiction, which is amazing. It was published in a dozen languages and named the year's best nonfiction book by Entertainment Weekly. And in 2009, David was named to the Time 100, which is Time Magazine's list of the world's most influential people. David followed up Beautiful Boy with another book called Clean, which also became a New York Times bestseller. And the book Clean was the result of the years David spent investigating the disease of addiction and America's drug problem, which, as we just mentioned, he sees as the greatest public health challenge of our time. In December 2019, David became the first recipient of the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry Arts and Literature Award. One final note, David recently launched the Beautiful Boy Fund, devoted to making quality evidence-based treatment available to people who need it and identifying and supporting research to further the field of addiction medicine. David, thank you. Thank you for being here with us today and for being willing to share your wisdom and your passion with us. It's great to have you here.
Well, Sarah, thank you again, and again, thank you for allowing me to be here. In that bio, the one thing that, of course, I think everybody would realize that shifted a little bit is that I identified at the time that substance use is the #1 health problem in our country. I guess that would be a little bit hard to justify right now because we're obviously in the middle of another health crisis that is, killing more people. But at the same time, I'm really committed to this idea that we can't forget this one because, we are still losing over 200 people a day to addiction and overdose.
Wow. I truly appreciate you saying that and sort of holding that up at the beginning of our conversation today. And one of my questions was going to be, has that changed at all with how you view addiction? And is there really even I don't know if I want to say like a point to prioritizing, COVID and addiction and all of these things, but it sounds like they all still need to be dealt with. They're all still
Well, the thing
important.
is that, the thing that I think people don't know is the connection between the two. And there really is a dramatic connection. And we've seen it over the last year. One of the things that we know about drug use in general, and addiction in particular, is that it is related to stress. We also know that it is, if we intervene, we can actually help people. Well, two things that have happened over the last year that has really dramatically changed everything is that, all of us know well that the stress on most people has increased dramatically. And so incidents of suicide are way up. Drug use is way up. I said 200 people are dying a year. That was over a year ago. A day. That was over a year ago. The numbers are higher now. We just don't have those exact numbers. Mental health related issues is worse. So part of it is related to the stress of having to deal with COVID. One of the other things that can predispose someone to using drugs and addiction is isolation. And of course, we've been isolated a lot of this year. And then the other factor, is that because we're focusing on, what is a bigger crisis right now, because we're losing so many people and so many people are sick and our hospitals are filled because of it in many places, is that the priority has shifted so that there's less treatment available. And that has had a dramatic impact. And I feel like, so we can't separate them, and we can't forget this one, because whereas hopefully, there will be a time when we'll look back on COVID as being a nightmare, but we've moved on from it. Well, hopefully it'll happen with addiction too, but it's going to be a tougher problem to solve in a way. There's no vaccine to treat people or protect people from addiction.
And oh my gosh, I appreciate that so much. And you clarifying sort of that relationship really speaks to the entangled web that addiction has over our country, our lives. One of the saddest things that I read in Beautiful Boy was this idea that addiction cannot be cured. Have you made peace with that? Should we make peace with that? Please tell me your thoughts about that.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the book came out in 2008. So it's been over 10 years, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to do math in my head. Boy, that's not big.
Yes.
And things have shifted. There has always been this assumption that addiction is this chronic illness that can't get better. We know how to manage it. And people do manage it, and people stay sober and get well, and their brains heal, and they move on with their lives. But we always assumed that there was this, it was like they were on the edge of a cliff, and at any moment they could relapse and start, in a sense, over. Now we know more, and that we can cure addiction. There are people who, it's tricky, because it's not a disease like many other diseases where you can take medication or you can have chemotherapy or radiation. And if it's successful, hopefully, of course, people can be considered cured. This is harder because we're dealing with a problem that has biological roots and has psychological roots and has environmental roots, really complicated. But there are people that, at least according to our understanding of what the word cured means, we consider cured, and it's because they've gone through this process. They have no more symptoms. They have no more cravings, which is one of the symptoms of addiction. They're being followed. It's new, and so we don't know 100%. I don't know if there's a way to definitively answer that. But the good part about it is that whether we call it cured or something else, there's a word I can't remember, but just that it's manageable. That people live full lives, and some of them are newly recovered teenagers whose lives they don't go on the trajectory that my son went on, which was nearly dying many times, and they get well, they get sober, they get and their lives go forward as in remarkable ways. And it happens to people who've used drugs for a long time, and they've suffered this substance use disorder for many, many years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And something finally happens. They're on the right medications. They're dealing with not only their substance use, but usually substance use disorders that are extreme. The addiction that's extreme is accompanied by things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. If all those things are managed and successfully, then it is potentially a cure, and people go on with their lives, and they don't relapse. I mean, the only thing I would say with that is that anybody can become addicted. You don't have to have any of the things that we know make it more likely, and so there always is this risk.
It was almost as a reader of Beautiful Boy, it was almost a relief when I read the afterword that you had written 10 years later that Nick had been diagnosed with severe bipolar and depression. I have so many questions about this. I'm going to try to make it coherent. Was that a relief to you almost to know that there was maybe a reason you could point to? Because throughout so much of A Beautiful Boy, we are taken through all of these emotions and the blame that you put on yourself, and the blame that you put and then took off of and then put back onto Nick. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
The relief was huge
Mm.
for the exact reasons that you say. When a person becomes addicted, I mean, I hear it from parents all the time, you know, their kids become someone different.
Mm.
And it is baffling, and makes us crazy, and we get scary, and we get mad at them. We blame them. You know, if they didn't want to hurt us or their life themselves, they would just stop. And Nick struggled clearly with moods, and it was all around. And I didn't know. I thought maybe it's because he was using, you know, all these drugs, and of course that has an impact that makes things worse. But I was baffled, and he was as baffled. He didn't know why he couldn't stop.
Mm.
And when he was finally diagnosed, finally we got him in the hands of a psychiatrist who did full psychological testing, and she determined that Nick, you know, has bipolar disorder, as he said, and he has serious depression. It made sense. Okay, here's a kid who is struggling with these mental illnesses, these psychiatric disorders. He goes in these deep, dark places, or he feels so manic and crazy that he can't control himself. And so it's no surprise that he goes back to using drugs because, first of all, it's all he ever learned to use. He grew up using them as a way of, quote unquote, fixing himself, feeling better. And the other thing is that drugs do, you know, at least at the very beginning, they do have an effect. They can make someone who's depressed forget that they're depressed. Ultimately, it makes them more depressed. We know that. Someone with bipolar disorder, some of the bipolar medications, I know that up where you are in South Dakota, there is a big problem with methamphetamine.
Yep.
There is research also that shows that methamphetamine can help someone feel better who has bipolar disorder for a very short time, because it corrects some of what's going on in their brains, the brain chemistry, the neurotransmitters that are firing. And so there is relief, but it also does damage to the brain. It makes it worse, and it makes them less able to cope with their lives. And so everything starts to fall apart, and all that increases the cycle of addiction. They're going to use more to try to feel better. They can't feel better. Their lives are falling apart. They use more so that because they're distraught, they're freaked out. So to learn that Nick had these psychiatric problems, it really did. First of all, it was a relief, because both of us understood he wasn't a bad kid making bad choices. Yeah. For Nick's position, for me, it's like, oh, my son. But for him himself, it's like, oh, okay, there is a reason that I am going back over and over again. But the other thing is that it gave us a course forward, because when Nick got diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, those are both treatable illnesses. So he got in the hands of a really good doctor, a psychiatrist. He went into therapy. He's on psychiatric medications for both those problems. And he feels like a different person, and you feel it when you're with him. And he hasn't relapsed since he got diagnosed and treated. So for both of those reasons, it was huge.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. The end of the book sort of leaves it sort of, you know, open, because you didn't know at the time, where is this going? Will there be relapses? And thank you for sharing that.
Oh God, yeah. Well, there was a time, of course, when I didn't know Nick was going to make it to 21. I write about it. And this summer, he had his 39th birthday. So he's going to be 40 years old next year. And it's a miracle. I mean, it also makes me feel old to have a 40-year-old son, but it's phenomenal.
Thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful and important, and so good. You know, you mentioned a little bit up here in the Dakotas. There's a huge meth problem. I'm going down my list of questions here a little bit, but I feel like this is a good time to talk about this. So just one second here. I sort of want to ask. Yeah, okay. Just while I'm searching for this question. Oh, here we go. You know, we talked a little bit about taking addiction seriously. Like some people are taking COVID seriously, like we take the war on cancer seriously. And you sort of noted that not only is addiction preventable, but also you just mentioned that we're starting to look at it being a curable thing. What does this sort of all-out war on addiction, which you say should be modeled after the all-out war on cancer, what does this look like? And then how does that tie in with the idea, if it does at all, of destigmatizing addiction?
Okay. Well, there, it's huge, and there's so many aspects. One of the things is about destigmatizing addiction is that if somebody gets sick with any other disease, we know they're sick. Our hearts go out to them and their families. If somebody in your family is very ill, your neighbors may bring you casseroles or whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of support. Yeah. When someone becomes addicted, it doesn't look like other diseases because there is not another disease that requires a person to go out on the streets and find methamphetamine, for example, or heroin or fentanyl or whatever it is, and then to actively take it to be sick. So of course we judge people. Of course we always have judged people in that way. And when you judge people like that, they're stigmatized, they're shamed, they're pushed aside in society. We treat them as if they are bad people, they're immoral, and they believe that themselves. And so once again, there's another cycle where somebody feels badly about themselves. And so just like with bipolar disorder or depression, and just like again, if you're feeling bad about yourself and you're used to using drugs to feel better because you started when you were 16 years old, smoking pot, whatever it is, that's where you're going to go. The numbers of people dying has been skyrocketing. Originally, the uptick was related to opioids. Started the drug crisis of the last decade started really with prescription pills. People were selling and using things like OxyContin and Vicodin and Percocet, all kinds of things like that. Because again, the first time you do it, it feels good. And if you're suffering in other ways, you can make yourself feel good. Those are painkillers. They take away pain. Yeah. But they're very addictive. And so people became very addicted. And then, it was a lot easier to get a drug and cheaper to get a drug that has a similar impact because they're in the same class of drugs, which was heroin. And that's sort of when we shifted over to this opioid crisis. Now, in some parts of the country, Nick's drug of choice, they call it, which I think is a really kind of this unfair description because it implies that someone is choosing to be addicted and choosing a certain drug. But the drug that Nick used the most because it made him feel the best at first was methamphetamine. And that now is replacing in some places the problem of opioids, which hasn't gone away. But in South Dakota, it is a crisis with methamphetamine. Then we switch to, so we have the problem. And by the way, another reason for the stigma around addiction is that people on meth aren't necessarily the nicest people in the world. When Nick was using meth, he did things that freaked me out. I mean, it was unconscionable things that I knew that my son would never do, but he was doing. He broke into our house. He stole credit cards and money. I see your kitty cat behind you. No, he's adorable. He broke into our friends' houses. He was arrested. These were things that, what? My son? Who is this person? Well, somebody using drugs and someone who becomes addicted, their brain changes. And the normal for them, the way they feel normal, the way that other people feel normal without drugs is with the presence of drugs, because drugs change their brain and they need that boost of dopamine, whatever, to feel okay. So again, how can a disease cause someone to steal money or to break into stores or people's homes? So of course we judge people who do that as they are stigmatized as well. But when we recognize that the reason they're doing it is not that they're bad people, but because they are sick, then we realize that the sooner we treat them, the less likely their disease is going to progress to the point where they are going to be using drugs. I mean, that they are going to be committing crimes related to drugs and end up in the criminal justice system. So then we go back to what you asked before. What do we do? Yeah. Because of the stigma, we have treated this as if people were bad people. And so we've pushed them aside. Many of the homeless people all around the country are there because they have addiction and mental illness. Our prisons are filled with people with mental illness and addiction. We push them into that system instead of the healthcare system, which is where we treat people who are sick. So cancer was a stigmatized problem. I remember my mom, when I was very young, one of our neighbors had cancer, and they wouldn't use the word. They called it the big C, and they were whispering, and it was a secret, and there was some shame around it. Now we don't think twice about that. Now we know people with cancer are sick, and we also know then what to do about it, which is we get the best treatment possible.
Yeah.
And the reason that we've made so much progress over the last 40 years or so, 50 years, is because that's the war on cancer has been going on that long. And we've shifted to this model where we know cancer is a disease. People who have cancer are ill. We put a fortune of billions of dollars into finding new treatments, billions of dollars into accessing treatments so people who need it can get well. And now, though cancer still kills many people, and too many people, and I think that number will go down the more we learn, we're very successful in treating many cancers. We haven't done that with addiction. If for 50 years we've been focusing on addiction the way we focus on cancer, I have to think that we would be so far advanced in the way that we look at addiction. And that would include two sides of it. You mentioned them at the beginning, both the sides of prevention. How do we prevent people from getting addicted, and then treating people who become addicted? I believe that we are going in that direction, but and part of the reason is because we're losing so many people that when we start losing people, that's when we take action. People want to figure this out. What can we do to help people? So we do need a war on addiction, not the war on drugs, because that focuses on the old paradigm, which says that, again, we want to, we still don't want to allow people to, be shipping methamphetamine. I mean, that still is a crime and should be a crime. But people who become addicted aren't criminals. So when we treat them instead of this war on people who are addicted, but we treat them with this war on their disease, we shift everything. And that is why when you asked me before if we can treat this disease, I will say absolutely we can treat it. That's the word I guess I was looking for, treat it. Cure it, we don't know. Treat it, absolutely. So people stop using drugs. And the way that they do it is that they use the same thing if you had, or if I had, somebody we loved had, God forbid, but somebody we had a certain kind of cancer, we know what to do, which is you would find the best cancer specialists in your area, whatever, you go to the doctor, insurance would pay for it, and you'd get treatment. Hopefully you'd get better. That's what we need for addiction, and we're starting to get there, but it is very, very, very slow process.
What would help with that process? What would help speed that up? I mean, ideally, it would be billions of dollars of government funding, but what can we do?
Well, billions of dollars of government funding is really, really, really needed, and we would make a huge difference even if it wasn't billions, if it was a significant amount of money that would go to research and go to early stage research. So another part of it is that we know that certain kinds of cancers come from nowhere. We don't know where they come, or there's a genetic piece. We don't know how to prevent them. But we also know that there are some kinds of cancers where they come from. For instance, the obvious one is lung cancer. We know that it's tied in with cigarette smoking. So the fewer people we've been able to get to stop smoking, the more people we've been able to get to stop smoking, the more people we're preventing from getting lung cancer. And so we are preventing that disease. So besides needing money as much as we can get to develop new treatments for addiction, to improve medications, to improve psychological treatments, and also to give people support who are in recovery so that they don't relapse, they don't go back, but it's to have just to have a system in place so everybody can get the help that they need, whatever level they're at. And we can follow the model of cigarette smoking and lung cancer by preventing people from becoming sick. And boy, if we can do that, imagine the suffering we prevent. Imagine the crimes we prevent. In some cities, about 90% in the middle of some inner cities of people who are in prison are there because of drug-related problems. And imagine the money that we're spending, never mind what we're doing to those people and their families and their lives, their prospects. Another one is we save a fortune on healthcare. Again, go to an inner city hospital, talk to a doctor or a nurse, and what they'll tell you is that they'll tell you about the amount of their resources that they're dealing with that are related to people who have drug problems. And it is a huge number. In some places it's half, in some places it's 70%, in some hospitals it's 80%. Again, prevent that from happening. Think about how much money we talk about the mess that our healthcare system is in. If we weren't spending 80% of the money in many emergency rooms on treating people with addiction because we prevented them from getting addicted in the first place, we would have all that money to help people who have other problems. And so, it's a whole package that it's a whole bunch that we need to do. Sorry, and we are starting. Again, we're starting, but we are starting really, really slowly. It's a slog, and it got slower because of the COVID epidemic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you said, sorry, don't be sorry. Your passion here is shining through, and I love it. And I love to
I was going to say,
that.
you can tell it's something I care about.
It's beautiful.
And part of the reason, and I think it's important to remember, is that, I had my personal experience, but I just said that my son's been sober for 10 years. And so we're lucky. We're very, very lucky. But because I've written about addiction, and, I wrote Beautiful Boy, as you said, and then Clean as a follow-up, and then we made a movie out of Beautiful Boy. And because there's been so much attention around us and our family, people out there, one of the things you mentioned, which I keep going back to also, is the idea of stigma. Mm. One of the other things that happen because of the stigma is that if I have a drug problem, if I had another kind of problem, I would tell somebody. I would tell my parents. If I was a child, I would tell somebody. I would go to the doctor, whatever. I would get help. But because people are ashamed who have addiction because they're afraid that they're going to be judged, they don't tell anybody. And it's also true of their families. When my son became addicted, I was terrified, but I was also mortified and afraid of being judged. I must be a terrible father if my son became a drug addict. So I didn't tell anybody. And I didn't, so when we don't talk about a problem, we don't understand that, we aren't alone, how prevalent it is, how the fact is that, our neighbors are probably suffering some versions of mental health problems, addiction problems, alcoholism, whatever it is. The stigma prevents us from being open about it. And because finally things got so bad in our family, and I happen to be a journalist that I wrote about it, I still hear from people every single day from around the country. And one of the things they say to me is they acknowledge the suffering, they acknowledge the fear, they acknowledge the bafflement, again, about someone they love doing so many self-destructive and destructive things. But they also say that nobody knows that their family is suffering like that. They don't, in some cases, they don't, a mom and dad and their child, the child has addiction. The parents don't even tell their brothers and sisters and their parents because they don't want their child to be judged, and they don't want to be judged. And so part of it is this isolation.
Yeah.
And so the other part about it, in fact, it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful that we're having this conversation today, is that when we can be open about this problem, just like every other problem, we realize we aren't alone. And what a relief. What a relief that we realize that we aren't alone, that there is a whole community of people dealing with this. And these letters I get every day from people remind me how lucky I am, because a lot of the people are in the early stages where they're saying, what do I do? Mm-hmm. A lot of them just want to say, I thought I was alone. I'm so glad to know that I'm not. But a lot of the people write and say, my beautiful boy became addicted and died. Mm. My beautiful daughter, my lovely daughter, died. And I am reminded, that's why I'm reminded every day, first of all, how lucky I am. But I'm also reminded every day about what a big problem we have that we cannot ignore.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that you started talking about that, because I wanted to ask about asking for help and about speaking up. Was it difficult? I know that you're a journalist, and so you have sort of a unique avenue there, but even getting the guts, even getting the courage to even start talking about this. That must have been so difficult. How did you begin to talk about it, and how did you begin to look for help?
Well, the first part is I've never, as much as, yes, I'm a journalist, but I've not written about myself or my family, and I'm the kind of person I think that would be very reluctant to do that. I was at that, before this. But what happened was Nick became addicted when he was very young, a teenager. Well, he started using drugs when he was very, very young. I later found out that he was smoking pot when he was only 12 and 13. And then his drug use escalated, and he was drinking a lot. And then he began using pills, and then he began using meth. So when it finally got to the point where I realized that we were in trouble, at first I was like everybody, every parent that I know, which is to say, oh, it's okay. A lot of kids are getting high and to party, and it's normal, and people use drugs. And I did when I was a kid, whatever they say. But there's a point where it became very clear to me that Nick's drug use was going to kill him if we couldn't figure it out. He would wind up on the streets. He was beaten up. It was appalling. It was terrifying. So I realized that we had to do something. And at that point, I didn't know what to do. And so I began trying to sort it out, to figure it out by talking to a lot of so-called specialists, our pediatrician, physicians, psychologists, teachers, counselors. And I got all kinds of, in retrospect, really bad advice. I got people telling me, to do nothing, that you can't help somebody who's using drugs. And I was like, I can't help my son. I should do nothing. I mean, I have to do something. I'm his dad. He's going to die. One person told me to send my son to a boot camp, as if, getting someone to march in the desert is going to help them with a mental illness. Somebody told me to send him to the Czech Republic to a reprogramming camp. But finally I got Nick some help. And though it didn't last, there was a time when he was doing a lot better. And I really did soul searching about whether to write about this. And the reason I ultimately decided to do it is because I suffered those first many, many years thinking that I was alone. And I didn't want other people to think they were alone. I wanted people to understand that, that somebody else at least had experienced it. And that I realize can be very important, very healing for people. The other side of it is that because I waited such a long time, because I didn't accept that it was a problem. Nick's a teenager. It's a rite of passage, whatever it was. So this problem escalated and escalated and escalated before I finally recognized that he was in trouble, or we were in trouble. So the other message I wanted to give is, don't wait. Don't ignore drug problems in your kids and just assume that they're going to grow out of it, because in many cases they won't. So that's when I decided to write about it. But first I still was scared. I didn't want our family to be subject to that kind of scrutiny. I talked to my wife and Nick's mom, and I talked to Nick, of course, many, many times. I had them read the article before I published it. Others in our family, just because I wanted to make sure that nobody was exposed in a way they didn't want to be exposed. So I was really careful. And I published it, and that's when I became, I learned how many of us were the same. The letters I sort of described that still come in, a lot of them start by saying, how did you get into our home? Your family is my family. Your story is our story. So I went forward. I heard that reaction back from the New York Times article. So many people felt so alone that I finally, that's when I decided that, there was more of an important story to tell here. I started to do research. I realized how big the drug problem was, how many people were dying, how much we were spending related to criminal justice and health, and how many lost productivity because people at a certain point who are using drugs or become addicted, they don't work, they're on the streets. How much money we were spending as well was another factor. And so I decided to go ahead and tell the story of Beautiful Boy. That led to Clean, because at that point, Beautiful Boy, as you said, was really telling our family story. But I wanted to also address the problem the enormity of the problem, the impact on society, and to look at what we know about how to prevent this disease and how to treat it.
Even as you're saying all of this, I'm getting, I don't know if you can see the chat, I'm getting so many things in the chat talking about people's own beautiful sons and daughters and children, and who are saying thank you for sharing. It gives us hope. So you're even right now at this extreme, very, very moment, providing community and solace and solidarity to so many people.
Well, and I just, it's easy also to talk about prevention and treatment, but I cannot, I can't describe. I don't think anybody who has not been there knows what it feels like to have someone that they love. I was going to say especially a parent when it's a child, but it's a brother or sister or parent, anybody that, a spouse or partner or whatever. It's hell. It is hell. Partly because of society's way of looking at us and our person, but also because it's more than that. It's terrifying. You're watching somebody do things that could impact their lives forever and potentially could kill them. It is horrific. We try, and it's not easy. It's not like we find, it's not like, for me, it took over 10 years of this struggle I would finally get Nick some help. I didn't send him to Czech Republic, but I did finally get him some treatment programs, and he'd do better for a while, but then he would relapse. Again, he would almost die. He ended up in the emergency room. One time, a doctor, because he was injecting drugs in his arm, he got infected and they were going to have to remove his arm. They didn't, thank God. But those are the kinds of things you go through. And then you also, the other thing I went through, and again, parents, others who are dealing with this in their families, Nick would disappear. And the fear, I didn't sleep. I couldn't function. I didn't, we have 2 other children, and I did my best. My wife and I did our best to try to help them and give them the attention they needed, but I couldn't. No. I was too overwhelmed and too freaked out, because I was terrified that the phone was going to ring or someone would show up in the door and it would be, some disaster. And there were, again, disasters. I keep repeating that I'm lucky because Nick survived, but there were years when I didn't know if he was going to survive. So the only thing I can say about that part of it is that we have to also acknowledge that, because it is lonely. It is terrifying. Again, I don't think if people haven't been there, they can understand how hard it is and how the horror is. And I think that the only thing I can say about that is that there are ways not to solve the problem for yourself, but you can get some help for it. And I ended up doing it. It took me way too long, whatever it works for you. We went into family counseling, and it was a huge help. It helped the young kids, our younger kids, my wife and I, cope a little better. It didn't solve the problem. It wasn't like a magic wand, but we had someone to talk to. We were able to talk to each other about how it felt. And then there are support groups, Al-Anon and other support groups that are there to support people who are going through this. And at minimum, if you reach out to other people in that way, you realize you aren't alone, and that can be huge. And there's somebody who understands. And, for me, I was able to cry in a way I couldn't cry in any other circumstance, because we were all suffering together. And also sometimes there is, hope and support offered. We were where you were. We didn't think she was going to make it. He was going to make it. And they did. And, and we're in recovery now. And, there's the residual damage, and I'm still suffering. And we experienced PTSD, post-traumatic stress, because it's so hard. But there also is support for people who are in the throes of this.
I appreciate you saying that so much. And I'm reminded of, in your book, you talk about the PTSD, you talk about, you're in therapy, and every time the phone rings, it triggers panic, because is it Nick calling? Is he high? Is he somewhere? Is he in trouble? Do I need to go rescue him?
Yes.
Did telling this story help you process some of that PTSD, or did it bring it back? Did it make it worse? And I don't know if this is related to this question or not, but I still want to ask it. How can people who are going through this right now take care of themselves? They're suffering because someone they love is suffering. They're living on the cliff of this other person's addiction. How can they take care of themselves right now?
Well, one of the ways is to have support and to realize that a lot of us, I think, are the kinds of people like I have always been, which is like, I can deal with this myself. I'm not going to ask for help. I even would, try to pull that with my wife, who knew that I wasn't okay. So part of it is to first of all admit it, to ourselves, that this is hell and that it would be hell for anybody, and therefore to try to talk to people about it. And sometimes it can be somebody in your family. It helps if it's somebody who has gone through it because they get it. And as I said, therapy was huge, and part of it was to learn more about what was going on, because of this idea of the judgment and the blame. When I started to learn that, no, Nick has a mental illness, he has a problem, his brain is not functioning properly. Again, it didn't solve the problems, but it really helped me a lot, because I realized that it wasn't just that he was this bad kid, but it was that he had this problem. And therefore I was able to somewhat let myself off the hook. But not that I did. I don't think parents do. We're programmed in a way to feel responsible and maybe guilty and blame ourselves. But it got somewhat better. So, a lot of it is getting support, and a lot of it is not taking it, not keep trying to bear it on our own shoulders in this way that we often do. Because being isolated definitely makes it worse. And when you keep anything inside, whatever you're suffering with, it can build up and build up and build up, and it can make you crazy and hard. And even, for example, telling people who I worked with, I'm a writer, and so I was on deadlines for magazines, and if I tried to pretend nothing was happening, and all of a sudden I couldn't turn an article in, it was because I was being irresponsible. But almost every time I said, I don't know where my son is, and I can't focus on this. Wasn't always true. There are some people that didn't care. Well, you have a deadline Friday. I don't want to hear the excuses. But generally, people said, oh my God, my father was an alcoholic. I know what you're going through. I'm so sorry. My son is on the streets, whatever. So openness is a huge, huge piece of it, and getting support, because I think that we are not capable of dealing some things ourselves without support. And for me, it was professional support. One of the things that was really, really useful, and it was also a very profound lesson for me, is that, as I said, we tried to take care of our younger kids, Daisy and Jasper, as well as we could. But I was not sleeping. As I said, I was worried. I was getting in my car trying to find Nick in places where I thought he might be using drugs. It was nuts, but I did it. And then when he was in the hospital, of course, I would go to the hospital. That was my focus, was trying to keep him alive and being afraid that he wouldn't. So Daisy and Jasper, as being very young kids, they were traumatized because their parents were. And I couldn't look at them. In other words, I couldn't see it, because that's not what my focus was. And we pretended in a way that, oh, they're going to be fine. They're young enough. They don't really know what's going on. Well, they knew what was going on, and they absorbed it. So finally, following someone's advice, we took them to a therapist, and a family therapist. And the four of us, Karen and I, and the two kids, Daisy and Jasper, were sitting with this therapist. And they didn't want to be there. They were really scared. They're not, they were young. They're not going to sit there and spill their problems to a stranger. But what he did instead was he looked at them, and in a very sincere and very warm way, and he said, I want to tell you a little bit about what it's like to have somebody that you love using drugs and doing things that scare you. And just that was huge for them. And we could see their bodies, go from like this to being, sort of like this, because somebody was acknowledging what they were experiencing. And the other thing that he did was acknowledge something else that they were feeling is, they loved their older brother. They adored him. They worshiped him in some ways. But they were really mad at him too. How can you feel those two things at the same time? And that's what the doctor addressed. He said, I want to tell you this word that you may not have heard before. And the word is ambivalence. And that means that you can feel two things at once. You can desperately want to see somebody, but afraid of seeing them. You could love them, but be really mad at them. And that was a huge, huge milestone. And getting them help was a big, big part of what helped us. So that is the answer, I think. Was that the answer to the second question? I think was it also the answer to the first question, which I kind of forgot?
I think so. The first question was just, how are you taking care of yourself? And I love that
Oh,
you ended
oh,
up.
oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, therapy, but the other part of it, of course, is that we are no good for anybody else if we're no good for for ourselves, if we don't take care of ourselves. And so one of the things that was really hard to do when any of us are suffering is to do what I did, which is this became a 24/7 preoccupation, and it didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that we do have to take care of ourselves, and even if we're doing it for them, because we know that we can't help them if we're not okay, we need to do it, and whatever that means. It means getting distracted sometimes, not focusing on it 24/7. You mentioned my telephone. I was so scared always that the phone would ring and that Nick would be dead, or that he'd be in the hospital, or that he'd be in prison, jail, whatever. I always had the phone on 24 hours a day. And that same therapist, that family therapist, talked about the intense stress that caused, not just for me, but for the family. Their dad being so preoccupied with the phone ringing. And I said, well, how can I not? And he said, give yourself an hour where you turn your phone off, go for a walk, give yourself 2 hours. There's nothing that's going to happen in that 2 hours that's going to change anything. And it was hard for me to do it, but I did. And I would go for walks, and Karen and I would take walks, and we'd go with the kids to the park or something like that, and just try to take care of ourselves a bit. And for people who are into exercise helps a lot because it can help clear their brain. It makes them feel better. It relieves some of the stress. Whatever works. I went to the movies once, and I couldn't even conceive of going to the movies, but I went to the movie, and after the movie, I realized that it wasn't that I was 100% in the movie and 100% out of my head in terms of other problems. I was still, it was inside me and part of me, and I still was worried. But at the end of the movie, I thought that was, I survived that, and I was sort of in somebody else's story for a while, and that was okay. So self-care is whatever it means for you. And sometimes people need help to find that, because we forget, we lose it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the things I learned by reading your book, was the existence of Al-Anon. And you sort of walk through the 3 C's and looking at what is my role in all of this, not just because of the blame, but because of, I want to save my child. Yeah. Or I want to save my friend or my loved one or whoever it is who's suffering. Can you walk us through? You started off feeling a lot of skepticism about those 3 C's, and I think you ended up coming to terms with them. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I would do, I suggest that people at least check out Al-Anon, and if they don't like it, it's not for everybody. Mm-hmm. Go online. There are all kinds of other support groups. There are support groups just with parents who are dealing with drug issues, and they're not that traditional approach. But I went, and it was really helpful. Partly because I realized that I wasn't alone, but also partly because of the kinds of conversations. I started to be able to separate a little bit what I could do to help him and what I couldn't do to help him. And that was a big help, even though it was also hard. There's nothing about this that's not hard. No. But yeah, they kept repeating in these meetings the 3 C's. And I'm going to get them wrong, but they were compassion. Wait, you tell me. Do you
have, God. Well, I have to open up your book.
Okay. You can't, okay, I got it.
Okay.
You can't control it. You didn't cause it. And you can't cure it. I did it.
I'm like going through your book over here. Like, what are they?
I did it. Good, okay.
Good.
So I heard those over and over again. And I said, I could not accept any of them at first.
Yeah.
But eventually I could accept the first one. You can't control it. I tried. Mm-hmm. I tried and tried and tried. You can't cure it. Trickier. Because you can't cure it yourself. Obviously, you have to engage the person who's sick in whatever they're struggling with. So I couldn't cure it. I did have to accept that. But that didn't mean that I couldn't do what I could to get him treatment so that he could cure himself. So that was a little bit of a trickier one. Mm-hmm. So the control and the cure thing, and even the cause part of it was scary for me at first. It was like, well, I must have done something wrong as a father. So those things, when they said over and over again, you didn't cause it, I didn't buy it fully. Yeah. I don't know if I still do, because I definitely know that Nick had this illness. I didn't cause him to have bipolar disorder. But I made his life harder because my life was not. I was really young when he was born. I did things that I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But I didn't cause it. I mean, we don't cause someone to become addicted. We can contribute, I guess. So I had to separate those things. I just sort of explained the idea of you can't cure them because you can't, it's just like if somebody else has cancer, you can't cure them. You have to rely on professionals to cure them. And ultimately, are they going to take their medication? Are they going to go to, in the case of addiction, are they going to go to AA meetings if that's what they need? Are they going to go to therapy? So cause and cure, control. I mean, I guess the whole thing was this process of trying to sort of go back and forth and to realize that I guess what it was is that the things that bothered me about those was that it sounds black and white and easy. The reality to me was realizing that the problem was that I was trying to either accept them or deny them, when instead of looking at the truth in every single one of them, because things are not black and white in life. They're not black and white when you're dealing with people at all, anything, and they're not black and white when you're dealing with illnesses, including addiction, of course. So to find some middle ground in each one of these things was huge. But the idea of having this guideline and reminding me and repeating it over and over again was part of me going forward, because I was trying to control everything. I thought I caused it completely because, I divorced from his mom when he was little, and wasn't a good divorce. Some people have them, I guess, but I sure didn't. So it was coming to terms with the fact that there were some things I could control, some things I couldn't control, and I had to accept that. Same thing. I didn't cause it, but I didn't help. And I couldn't cure it, but I could help in that way, to the limits of what another person can do to somebody, and to help somebody who's sick.
Yeah. And I read so much desperation and frustration, and I know those words don't even begin to scratch the surface, and so much helplessness, especially when there's just so many repeated instances of relapse and either denial by the person who's suffering, in this case Nick, who is addicted, saying like, I don't have a problem, I don't want your help, I don't need your help, I can stop when I want to. What would somebody who's at that point of this journey, what is their role? What should they do?
I guess there's no black and white answer to that, but I guess I would say the combination of everything that we've been talking about, which is to do everything you can, accept that you can't do everything. One of the things I really don't agree with and really bothers me about a lot of the traditional way we thought about addiction was this idea that people had to, that you couldn't help them. I heard that, as I said at the very beginning, from so-called specialists, and I heard it in Al-Anon meetings. The cliches abound in those meetings, and again, some of them are there because they are true and they're useful. But the thing that they talk about is that you have to let a person hit bottom, with the idea that unless the person is so desperate and scared and sick and miserable and horrible, and sometimes that means near death, they're not going to be able to get help. The problem with that is that hitting bottom for some people never happens, and that they can die, and it happens. Dad told me, they kept telling me to let him hit bottom. He overdosed and he died. Did he finally hit his bottom? Once we understand that people who are addicted are ill, we realize the last thing we want to do is let it hit bottom, because when somebody's sick, we want to catch them and get them help as soon as we can, because we don't want it to get worse. So that message, I think, is really dangerous. The other thing that it does is it makes parents not feel okay about our instincts to try to protect our kids. You are a bad person. You are enabling them. You're trying to, you're responsible for what they're doing, which we aren't. And so the idea of having that impulse to try to save our kids, that's what it means to be a parent. So the idea of standing back, again, not black and white. There are things we can do and things we can't. But if somebody's sick, we want to do everything we can within our power to try to help them. The other thing that we can do, I think, is also acknowledge that this is a problem that is very complex, that doesn't just have to do with taking drugs, putting drugs in their mouths, our mouths, like smoking or shooting or whatever it is, but they are related to what we were talking about at the beginning. People who are more stressed out are more likely to use drugs, and therefore it's harder for them to get well. I know that other factors right now are influencing people's lives and making life harder. And I know that part of it is, I know near where you are, it's there's, that the impact on community, on rural communities, on whatever, it's crops are in trouble in some places. There's the weather, there's droughts, the economy that increases stress on families enormously. And that is probably related to the reason that more people are using drugs. So what can we do about, another thing we can do is recognize that and not just do the interventions that are going to help somebody hopefully use fewer drugs or stop using drugs, but also help whatever it is they need in their life. If a child is experiencing problems at home, obviously, if there's abuse, if there's neglect, if there's abandonment, we want to help them. And that's part of our responsibility. And not only are we going to help them use drugs less and hopefully not become addicted, but we're going to help with their lives because we're helping them dealing with whatever traumas they're experiencing. The loss of a loved one. A lot of times, we don't address it, we don't talk about it, but it's scary for kids, to have a grandparent die. And if we can help them through that, the stress, we can alleviate some of the stress. And so in other words, it's a hard job, but we have to do it all, at least to the best that we can.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you for being honest and open and transparent with us. I have one or two more questions, but I want to make sure, is there anything that I haven't asked that you feel is really important that you want to talk about right now?
I think you've really sort of done a phenomenal job in covering everything. I guess I might go back and just emphasize a couple things because they're hard, which is the first one is to acknowledge if you are going through this, that it is hard. And it's okay that you're feeling overwhelmed because it's really, really hard. But at the same time, that is also important to get some help in whatever ways that means. And again, it might just finding somebody you can talk to, but it might mean going to a therapist or going to a support group. The other part of it is to recognize the complicated relationship between stress, mental illness, environment. So that, as I was saying, if you're living in a place that's economic, where there are economic struggles, people are struggling in a different way than they might have been, a few years ago. So to recognize the fact that drug use doesn't happen in a vacuum, that whatever it is that's making someone's life harder, whether they have depression, whether they have a psychiatric disorder, whether a person has an eating disorder, whether a person is experiencing loss, they've lost a job, whatever it is, it's a big tangled web there. And so when we understand that again, then we know that we can't just focus on the drugs. We have to focus on the bigger problems in someone's life to try to help them grow up or be as healthy as they can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I want to ask, just as we're wrapping up here, and one of the wonderful mods from Strengthening the Heartland, if you can let me know when I need to switch over to audience Q&A, because I can see a beautiful queue of questions lining up for us. I want to ask, just finally here, David, I want to ask about hope, because it's hard. And throughout the book, you talk about your own battle with optimism, but also with hope. And there's a quote that stuck out to me from your book that says, "I am terrified to my core to hope again." Just because you'd get your hopes up that everything was going to be okay. Nick was in rehab and then he would relapse. What is your relationship with hope today?
Boy, what a good question that is. And it's so important. That's the other side of the suffering that we experience. I mean, Nick says this, and I've heard him say it, and it's a pretty profound thought. There are times when things, I'm talking about at least 200 people are dying every day when somebody, I think it's really important to say this, because if somebody has experienced that horrible loss, they don't have hope. Hope, I guess there is a certain kind of hope, which is that there is a way that people, even if they experience that, can figure out a way to live with it. Not to expect it to go away. You will always experience something, but there is hope that people are able to cope and survive. And in some cases, people find purpose in a new way because they commit to maybe helping others. They are, anyway, whatever that takes. But what Nick says is that, when there's life, there's hope. And that is really, really important to know. And I know it really well myself because, Nick really did come close to dying. And he also came close to destroying his life in other ways when he was arrested and things like that. There were so many times when I felt no hope. And that a rational person looking on the outside would have said that it was hopeless because Nick relapsed so many times. He came so close to dying. Of course he's going to die. So the fact that Nick has been sober for 10 years and that he has this, what I would consider a remarkably positive in life. He's married, he loves his work, he loves his dogs. We're all super close. He goes surfing with his little brother and sister Daisy and Jasper and me. I go surfing with him, and he has this amazing life. So there is hope in our story, and there is hope in the stories of people, countless people. We know that about 25 million people in this country are addicted, but we know that there are far more than that who are in recovery. And so there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. People who've been using drugs for 30, 40 years get better. A lot of times kids start using very young. And so it feels, it's completely terrifying. Of course, again, to say that is ridiculous because everybody knows, but it is terrifying and we can't imagine that things are going to be okay. But it's important to know that there is also research that tells us to be hopeful, that even somebody who has a serious drug problem when they're young, they're most likely to get through it and to survive. And we can up the odds if we give them good treatment. But that's really a hopeful thing to know, that even if your child is like mine on the streets, you don't know where they are. Again, no guarantees. I never would want to give false hope, but there is every reason to be hopeful. It is most people who end up having drug problems do survive. We also don't want to rest on that in a sense either, because we don't want to take that for granted. Some people don't, and also we can help increase the chances, and also for ourselves and our relationships. There is hope. As bad as it gets, we can feel better even when we don't realize that we can. And again, sometimes it takes a lot of work and it can take a lot of time, and sometimes the work involves therapy and involves whatever it takes, again, for everybody. And there also is hope for relationships. And I can tell you that I hear, one of the things I hear about maybe more often than anything else, one of them, there's a few, but one of them is that when people become addicted, they get estranged, they get angry, it's a two-way thing. The people who are addicted blame the person sometimes, whether it's, again, the spouse, the parents, the kids, and vice versa, and people don't speak. It's dealing with enormous stress and chaos and uncertainty. And so, there were times when I hated my son. It's hard for me to admit it, but he broke into my house. He stole from his little brother. I think it's a normal reaction. It doesn't mean I also didn't love him, but I did. And so people write and say, I don't trust him. I don't want to see him. I haven't seen him in years. They cannot imagine that things can get better. But the other point that I guess I would make is that there is every reason to hope that relationships can heal, because they do heal. It can take time, and it takes a lot of work and commitment.
Yeah.
So eventually, if somebody does get sober, part of the process of their recovery, not always, but it can be and often is trying to repair some of the damage that they did because of their addiction. And that can involve reestablishing relationships. And a lot of times we, the other person, is so mad at them, we don't trust them. But I really recommend that people try every single time, because again, not black and white, it can be self-destructive at a certain point. You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of, if you're a parent with with other children, you have to take care of them as well. But generally, I've seen it over and over again. It's what I tell people who can't imagine that they haven't talked to their kids, or they're so mad at their children. A child is in recovery and they've been sober for a couple of years and they keep reaching out, but I cannot trust them ever again. I suggest that people reach out. Very small steps. Sometimes they need help. Don't pretend it's easy, and don't pretend that it's magical healing. But relationships do heal.
I love that. Don't pretend it's easy, and don't pretend it's magical. Yeah, it's not. It's hard, and it's hard work. And you're such an inspiration to all of us here. Thank you. Wow. If it's okay, I'm going to move over to some audience Q&A. And the first question I have here is, what would you say to a parent who has struggled with a child's addiction for years? What is the best thing they can do for their adult child who's living with addiction?
It's a little bit of an impossible question to answer because every family is different.
Yeah.
But the part of it that I can answer is that it's what we've talked about. Two things have to happen simultaneously. One of them is that we have to protect ourselves. We have to survive. We have to protect our mental health. And sometimes that can mean setting incredibly stringent boundaries to take care of ourselves and other people in our families. Because we can't cure it. We can't force another person, especially an adult. Sometimes when people are under 18, we can. I don't know what the laws are where you are, but here, where I am in California, if the child is under 18, we have the power to put somebody into treatment, whether they want to go or not. It's harder after that because we don't. But we still have often a lot of influence. Sometimes we have leverage because we're helping them, with whatever it is, where they're paying their rent or helping, pay for their insurance. But also there's an emotional bond that people have. And even if a child is telling you they hate you and they don't want anything to do with you, that bond is in there. And eventually there's hope that that bond will become active and people will have those conversations and get help, sometimes for themselves because their lives have gotten unmanageable, as they say in 12 steps, or because they miss us, they miss our relationships. So there is hope for that. So part of it, though, is recognizing that there is only so much we can do, and we have to take care of ourselves, and whatever that means. If you're in the situation, whatever it means, talking to your friends, talking to your neighbors, going on walks, taking classes, going to support groups, and for me, going into therapy and with a therapist who is trained in addiction, helping people who are somebody in their family is dealing with addiction because it's very specific. The other thing, though, I would say is to remember that there is hope for the person who is suffering, who has this problem. They're not out there having fun. Nobody wants to be addicted, even though it looks like it maybe from the outside. There is pain. And within the boundaries that we need to set, we have to figure out what we can tolerate and what we can't. But I say that unless it's gotten to the point where you cannot keep the door open, I would say keep the door open. We never know when someone's going to be ready to get help. Another thing is keep the door open because we don't want things to get worse. Whereas we can't save other people. If we can prevent them from falling further and further and further, we will potentially be helping them. So that means, again, there's no easy answer, but the one place that I would say is something to really keep in mind is that to keep the door open on the fact that people are sick who are out there. They're not doing it because they want to, and that there is treatment out there if and when they're ready for it. And so unless it became destructive to the point that it was hurting me or other people in my family, I would always help Nick. Even now, I would try to help him get into treatment if that's what he was ready for. They will tell you in Al-Anon or else in other programs, some places and some people will tell you not to help them. And it works sometimes. I've heard from people who say, if my parents kept helping me, I never would have gone into treatment. So again, it's not easy. There's not a black and white answer. But I feel like if you keep in mind the fact that the person that you love is sick, they have a problem with their brain, it's not functioning properly, then if there is a window that you can get them to see a therapist, an addiction psychiatrist who can do an evaluation like they did with Nick, figure out maybe they do have depression, maybe they have anxiety disorder, maybe they've suffered some sorts of trauma. Sometimes people need intensive treatment because of some sort of residential treatment. It's hard to find. It's hard to get insurance to cover it, even though insurance is supposed to cover it. Sometimes outpatient programs work. Sometimes just getting a person to see a psychiatrist or psychologist one time can change their trajectory, because then it's not you nagging them, but you have somebody who's a professional saying, I can see where you are. We need to have you see somebody who can treat your depression because you're depressed. I can tell. I mean, I know that, or at least we need to find out for sure. And there is help for your addiction. It gives somebody hope, and it gives somebody a course forward. So, there's in some ways those sound like mixed messages, and it goes back to those 3 C's. There's only so much we can do. But I guess I feel like we should do, within the only so much we could do, we should do what we can while we protect ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I have another question here from an audience member that says, while I realize meth is a nationwide epidemic, it seems like the problem is more severe in certain parts of the country. Is there a reason for this?
It's true. In fact, I think where you are, there's a reason that methamphetamine is in the news every day. And I think I read, I can't remember, that 200 people have died over the last year from meth overdoses. I think that, and there is, and some of it is just access. If you're in a community where there is a lot of heroin, it's likely that someone's going to use heroin. But I read a really amazing book that's talked about the routes that they transport the drugs, the chemicals that they make meth with, and it goes right through the heartland of America. And so, train loads and truckloads are going through there. And so, I guess part of it is just the fact that it becomes accessible in those places that are where there are the chemicals, or methamphetamine itself is being shipped in, whether it's coming in from the south, from Mexico, or whether it's coming in from the north, from Canada, or whether it's coming in from other countries like China, which is where some of this comes from. It also has to do with sometimes it has to do with money. I mean, with access to, with the economic conditions, because meth is generally cheaper. And when it is available in the community, it is really easy for people to find. And whereas sometimes it can cost, again, maybe $20 doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're an addict and you need that every day, $20 can be a lot to have to buy heroin or fentanyl. But meth you can get for $5 for that, to get through the day. One of the extra dangerous things that we need to know about methamphetamine right now is that a lot of the methamphetamine is not pure, and it is being cut with fentanyl. And so if somebody takes the combination of methamphetamine and fentanyl, fentanyl is like heroin times, I forget if they say 50 times stronger than heroin, which is, it's lethal. It's why most people who die of opioids right now are dying, because their heroin or their pills or whatever they're taking or is laced with fentanyl. Well, a lot of methamphetamine is too, which makes it really, really, really dangerous. One of the things there's a push for in some parts of the country, which is really controversial, is drug testing, which means, let's say I'm addicted to methamphetamine. I don't want you addicted to methamphetamine. Your family doesn't want you, and your society doesn't want you addicted to methamphetamine. So we don't want to help you stay being a meth addict. But on the other hand, more than that, I don't want you to die. So there is a movement now for places where it is safe, where somebody is not going to be arrested and thrown in jail, where their problem is likely to get worse, where they can bring their meth to have it tested to make sure there's no fentanyl in it. Now, the part about that is horrifying, I guess, is kind of obvious, which is like you're allowing somebody to tell us that they're using meth. But the other part of it that's important to remember, besides the fact that you want to save their life, because maybe tomorrow they're going to be ready to be in recovery, the other thing you want to remember is that you don't have those places set up in a way that does only that. But if you have somebody who comes in who's a meth addict or a heroin addict or whatever it is, you have them for a moment. and you have the opportunity to connect with them and to offer services to them, and, you know, what can we do for you? How can we help you? And even if that is that they don't take advantage of that today, they might tomorrow. They might tomorrow or the next day. And so the idea that we can support people with a lot of what they call harm reduction strategies, it's counterintuitive in some ways, but it is life-saving. It is absolutely life-saving.
I had not heard that term before. That is harm reduction strategies. And
Yeah.
I'm now
And the
going
point back to the question is that, well, the point back to the question is, if we also recognize that there are these stresses that increase the likelihood that someone's going to use drugs, and if methamphetamine is what is available where you are, then the other way you're going to help people, first of all, is to educate. You know, we don't want we want young kids to know how dangerous it is. We want them to know that we are not just saying no, just say no because we don't understand what we're talking about, or because, you know, we're afraid or something like that. We know methamphetamine changes the brain. It is one of the most neurotoxic drugs. But the other thing is, we know that poverty can lead to drug use. We know that family discord, you know, divorces that are trouble divorces, not, you know, so I don't know. I don't know what those are. I don't know what easy divorces are. I already said Hilda, but I hear people do it. You know, we're like best friends afterwards. But whatever it is, that adds to stress. So if we can also help people with their stress, which can involve if somebody is suffering because they've lost their job, make sure that they have access to the basics: place to live, food, water, healthcare. You know, whatever we can do to help people cope is better than having them use drugs to try to cope. And so we can help communities in that way too, because there is that connection between methamphetamine use specifically and economics and other kinds of stresses, but it's not only that. I mean, again, if you go into an inner city where unemployment, a neighborhood where unemployment is high, it's probably not going to be methamphetamine right now. It's going to be fentanyl and heroin. Cocaine is making a comeback too. That's generally in communities that are more affluent because it's more expensive. So, you know, complicated.
Yeah, extremely, extremely. Speaking of complicated, I have another very good question here from an audience member. Could you please speak to the labels that perpetuate stigma, such as clean, dirty, addict, alcoholic, and how important it is to learn and speak recovery language?
What a good question. And I've learned since, you know, I didn't understand that. I mean, my second book is called Clean, my second book about addiction. The old way of talking about drug use is you're clean when you're not using. So my whole point there is that, you know, how do we define clean, and how do we get people clean? But if you think about the word clean, it obviously has more to say. It does have, you know, the other side of being clean is being dirty. So does that mean that people who are using are unclean? And the answer is no. So it does matter. We are changing the language very slowly. One of the things that I think is the most profound change of language is that I think it's the American Society for Addiction Medicine, or one of those groups, redefined a few years ago the word addiction, or using a different word generally in the medical world of addiction medicine, things like that. And they're calling addiction a substance use disorder, which it is. And the reason that I think that is really, really, really useful is that we associate the idea with somebody with addiction is an addict, in quotes. That's always what we refer them to. If you are an addict, you are always an addict. Again, what is an addict? It's a bad person. It's a person without will power. It's a person who is going to break into my house. You're an addict. You know, the kinds of people, you know, I know in every community, there are people that we might look at and consider quote unquote addicts. When we recognize the fact that these people are people first, and second of all, they have a psychological disorder, a substance use disorder, we can look at them differently as somebody who's sick. But the other thing that the word substance use disorder tells us is that you are not either addicted or not addicted. A disorder, there's a whole range of people who have a very mild substance use disorder, which means the treatments are different than the person who has a very, very severe substance use disorder, who may need a kind of really radical intervention. The only thing I say about the words is that because so many people in recovery have grown up with and are in a system in which they do identify as being quote unquote an addict, I would like those people to get the message that we're talking about right now, which is that that word is loaded. And there are a lot of people that dismiss people who are addicts. But at the same time, you know, if you have to go into an AA meeting and say, my name is David and I'm an addict, that doesn't make you a bad person.
Right.
That just has to do with the tradition and a culture of the way that we've survived, that we've grown up, and we're growing out of it, and that's going to shift, but it hasn't shifted at all. So Nick, my son, still talks about himself as an addict, and as somebody who is not one, I'm not going to judge him for saying that, and I'm not even going to tell him, you know, he shouldn't say it. If that works for him, he goes to meetings. That's part of the language. You know, I'm convinced that it will shift, and so being part of that shift, I think, is important. Talking to our kids differently about it as well. Substance use tells us a lot. It's that the problem isn't that we are a certain kind of person. We are not an addict. It is that we are using a substance that is having a negative impact on our lives and could kill us.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I have final question. Final question is, this person says, I work for an addiction care organization that also helps families. How can we get involved with the Beautiful Boy Fund?
Well, thank you, because I'll tell you the reason I started the Beautiful Boy Fund is the experience I had at the very beginning of all this was very, very common, which was that the treatment system basically is a mess. And I ended up getting Nick in programs and working with so-called addiction specialists who had no training at all, and they ended up in some cases doing more harm than good.
Oh my God.
Things have certainly gotten better, but one of the things I identified before that has gotten worse actually over the last year and a half, programs around the country that actually are very much helping people. First of all, they had to change their tactics because they had to quarantine, so they couldn't have an open door. So people were addicted, you know, couldn't come in and have a place to get help. People with substance use disorders, sorry, they didn't have a place to help. But also money has been diverted. So I've heard that places that were on a shoestring budget already are shutting their doors because the money is going elsewhere. So, you know, I started the fund to try to help fill in a little bit of that gap. And, you know, the American Cancer Society has a budget, and they bring in, you know, way more than $1 billion a year. I think it's $1.7 billion or something like this. There's no equivalent in the addiction world, and there should be. But in the meantime, because, you know, when Amazon is the one company that made the Beautiful Boy movie, and at the very beginning, they very graciously said that they wanted to try to help. And so they helped me start this fund. And since then, a lot of other people have, you know, signed on and donated. And what we have done with the money that we've received is just trying to funnel it as responsibly as we can to places that are giving people help every day and saving their lives every single day. So in some ways, things shifted because of the epidemic, which is that instead of, we were going to be thinking more about long-term treatments and, you know, different kinds of programs to support. Part of what we've doing is sort of been triage. So if a program is going to go under in a small community in South Dakota, and they need, you know, relatively minimal funding to keep their doors open so they can be saving lives, we've been trying to identify programs like that and to try to give them some funding. You know, we don't have a ton of money, but it has been making a difference. So, you know, what we are is a fund, really, and so it really is about money. But I don't want to suggest that money is the way, even the best way for people to help. Community organization is probably the number one way to help. Support for people who are suffering addiction, so people have support among their families, among people themselves who have these substance use disorders. Groups that are coming to schools and school districts to demand that they start doing prevention campaigns that actually are effective, instead of telling, you know, doing nothing, or else saying, you know, just say no, but recognizing that there need to be a lot of supports in place. Families, parents, community people are organizing and also politicizing, so that they're making sure this is not a political partisan event. It's everybody on, blue, green, white, red, orange. I mean, everybody has to work together to try to solve this problem, because it does not discriminate against who's being hurt. So we have to make sure that we are giving pressure to our politicians to make sure that there are treatment programs and prevention programs in our communities. And sometimes if you go online, you'll find out that, wherever Sioux City has organizations that are doing this, will plug into those organizations, go to their meetings. They're probably right now on Zoom, so you don't even have to leave your house, figure out what you can do. And in communities where there are not organizations, put a message out there on social media, whatever, that we have this problem in our community. Methamphetamine is invading our community. My kid, my friend's kid, our schools, whatever it is, who will talk to me about what we can do? Groups have done that all over the country. I hear from them. Sometimes I connect with them. So I guess the main thing is gratitude for this question, because of the assumption or what's behind the question, which is that we want to help people who are suffering these substance use disorders in our communities. We want to help families. So I want to thank you for anything you can do to everyone that's out there, and to thank you if it was just to thank you and cover. And I think, Sarah, you are the master at being a moderator, because you really have covered everything with very sort of a way that's made it sort of easy. And I hope this too.
Well, David, thank you. This has been an amazing and beautiful experience. Thank you for your time and your wisdom and your honesty. It's been a very, very good event. I want to say a couple things. First, thank you, David, for being here once again. Second, I saw a few things in our community here. If you're looking for support or involvement or anything like that, we have Face It Together. We also have Strengthening the Heartland offers CRAFT, that's CRAFT, community support groups, which are sort of virtual and face-to-face training for friends and family members concerned about their loved ones who live with a substance abuse disorder. So
I'll jump
please
in.
do. Oh, yeah.
I'll jump in and say that somebody asked before what you can do if you're in the middle of this. CRAFT is a powerful, powerful tool. And the fact that you have it available is huge. So go there.
Yes.
Again, virtually go there, but go there to find out about it. And that's fabulous. So, so Sarah, thank you. And thank the people who are doing that, because it's even research has shown that can help enormously. And it not only, by the way, helps us who are the family members or the people who are affected by someone else's drug use, but it also helps the people who are using too, because when their family knows how to respond and is responding in a healthy way, it can help them get help. Sorry to interrupt.
No, this is fantastic. So those of you who are interested in CRAFT, Caitlin from our team just put a link in the chat. So that is at sdstate.edu/strengthening the heartland. You know what? I'll let you click on the link. I'm not going to read it to you. Please do click on that link. Let's see. Oh gosh, we're getting so many thank yous in the chat here. I do have one final thing. If you are interested in receiving your own copy of Beautiful Boy, we have some that we're going to be giving away that are actually signed by this amazing gentleman here with us today. So if you were in attendance live today, you're entered to win a drawing for the book. So, hey, if someone from our team from Strengthening the Heartland reaches out to you and says you've won a book, it's real. Don't be suspicious. It's okay to have that sent to you. We did a session with Anne Lamott a few months ago, and people were like, is this real? Did I really win a copy of the book? Yes, you did. So if you end up not winning a copy of the book, please do pick it up. It is just such an intense and beautiful and heartbreaking and hopeful read. So yes. All right. I'm going to let you all return to your lives. David, once again, I can't say enough. Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing. Thank you for everything you've done and for everything you're going to do. It's been just an amazing experience to speak with you today.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I should just sign off really quickly, but because you mentioned Anne Lamott's name, I think the perfect thing to say at the end of today's talk was something Annie actually said.
Mm.
She said, my neighbors, she says this, that we increase our pain by comparing our insides with other people's outsides. You know, we think everybody else is doing great. We are all struggling with something. When we connect in that way, first of all, we realize we're not alone. And second of all, we can get help. So thank you. And thank everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.